Good evening. This is Dale Lamb, Gardner-Webb University. This is Mels 603, Thursday, October 27th, a few minutes after 7. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I covered competencies the last couple of weeks, and I showed you examples of those. If you're still having problems with competencies, please let me know. Hopefully you understand how to go in and put your competency proofs in your folio and how to set up your folio. If not, review the first 15 minutes of last week's video. And if you need me to resend that, or if you need me to walk you through it, just give me a call or an email. And I can, or you can view that video again. You can look for that link. So moving on from competency folio back to your portfolio of your evidence artifact work. This week, the OMAD is due in discussion. Your 2 peer reviews of OMAB are due in discussion board also, and it's time, hopefully, that you can put your OMAB in task stream for evaluation. I got some feedback recently that students were concerned that their work's not being evaluated in a timely fashion. If that's the case, email me and let me know, and I will see if I can pass that on up the tree as I did last week. So please, if you're not getting your work evaluated in a timely manner, and timely means in a week or less. I think it should be quicker than that, but if you have work in there a week and it's not been evaluated, let me know. So we can move that on. All right, so that's where we are with our evidence artifact work. Please remember, as always, that try to stay on schedule with those. Now, with your weekly assignments, readings, and things, you do that on your own time, but try to stay on the weekly schedule with your evidence artifact work, as others are depending on you to do peer reviews of their work and so that they can peer review yours so they can meet their requirements for this course. I also had a question this week about if you don't stay on time with your turn-ins, how does that affect your grade? It doesn't. It's just that you've got other people depending on you. As long as you get your work in there by the end, that's what I'm interested in. So don't worry about those things. So this week, your reading and my information tonight centers around Exceptional Children's Program. Please remember when you do OMAC, that there are more special programs than just exceptional children's. When you're doing OMAC, when you're doing assessing special populations, please remember that those special populations include not only exceptional children, EC 504, but also intervention students, the ones that are referred to the process. They're a special population. Academically gifted, as well as limited English proficient or ESL, along with Title I if you have that at your school. So those are the populations that you should assess. Title I if you have it, ESL, LEP, or ELA, according to what your district calls the non-English speakers. Academically gifted, intervention referrals that go to your care or intervention team at your school, and then EC 504. So make sure you do an audit or an analysis on all of those groups for OMAC. I think I reminded you of that again last week. All right. So this week, the materials that I have under Zoom Session 8, I've got a peer review in there, a video review that Robbie did. If you want to view that, it's a very good one. It's one that you might find helpful as you do your own review. So again, it's under Zoom Session 8. I do have a video. I think I'm being joined by Luke. Luke, are you there? Hey, Luke. Can you hear me? Luke, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Welcome. All right. What I'm going to cover tonight is some things on exceptional children and other special populations. And so I'm just going to jump right in on those. I'm going to get out of this document and go back to new share. And I'm going to start with Jen's 10. I had a lady in my classes years ago named Jen, and we put together some talking points to talk about exceptional children, and here they are. All right. 10 things you need to remember about exceptional children. There's 10 million in the world today, and that was 10 years ago. So that number, I think, is somewhere around 12 million now, especially with all the children that are now being identified for the autism spectrum. So that's probably around 12 million. So what that means is it's not something that's going to go away. That number only grows. You're not going to have a school that doesn't have children with special needs. We have moved away from putting up separate buildings except for the most severely and profound. For example, in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we have Metro for the most severely and profoundly mentally and physically handicapped children. Outside of that, children are mainstreamed into the regular building now. Okay. If you're not familiar with PL 94-142, the Exceptional Children's Law that was passed in 1975, you should read that. And again, that's Public Law 94-142. You need to Google that and read all those things. Least restrictive environment, that's what we're talking about. Exceptional Children's Programs always seek to move children to the least restrictive environment. That's why we've seen a wave in the last 5 years to move students out of classes where they have EC classes on campus to where we're doing an inclusion model now where students are in the regular classroom and the EC teacher comes in and works with them in the room. I have a PowerPoint tonight. Now, it says inclusion versus mainstreaming, but what it really means is being in a regular EC class versus the inclusion model. They have a different, that term is different in this particular PowerPoint. But least restrictive environment means that that's the goal of every IEP team, to find the most appropriate placement for a child that's least restrictive. And so we're moving more and more to having students being in classes and serving them in regular classes. Civil rights of special needs children. I have a document on our week 8 Zoom that's parent rights, and so those are what we would know is be known as civil rights of those students. And so let me do a new share and go to that screen. This one right here that says parent resources, this is the civil rights for students. That's what that's referring to. So let me go back to my Gens 10. All right. In 97, 22 years after 94-142 was passed, it was amended with IDEA. And this now expanded past just special ed kids or exceptional children into students with disabilities, what we commonly refer to as 504. So you need to read that. So Exceptional Children's Law came out in 75, Education of Handicapped Children in 1975, also known as Public Law 94-142. And IDA, which was amendment to the law for also added 504 students. IDA also speaks to free and appropriate education. Evaluations only take place to the extent that it helps with student placement and services to be provided. IEP will be developed for each student, and both students and parents encouraged to hold an active role in the student's IEP. IEPs aren't just written by the EC staff now. These are the changes that IDEA brought about to Exceptional Children's Law. It also added disadvantaged handicapped kids, 504, but it also did these things for exceptional children.
So who's writing it?
Who wrote that?
Who you said EC teachers aren't, EC coordinators aren't just the ones writing it now?
Prior to 97, they were.
Oh.
Prior to 19. Now, one of your tasks to do was go to visit an IEP meeting, and the point was to see that now that IEP is written by a group of people. The EC teacher leads that group. You've got parent input. Sometimes the psychologist comes, the regular ed teacher comes. You have all these people now who have input into the IEP. That's by law. That didn't just happen by happenstance.
Right.
Prior to 1997, when a kid got an IEP, the EC teacher rated. And the parents didn't have, and there was a lot of consternation because parents didn't have any standing in that process. They weren't involved in that process.
Right.
And so that has completely changed the tenor of those meetings and how those and who's in charge and how those meetings turn out. No longer do teachers put kids in self-contained and the parents don't have any recourse. No longer do kids get put in facilities because parents have recourse. And that's why I also have that parents' rights book in there. That's kind of the civil rights pamphlet for exceptional children and their parents. But prior to 97, from 75 to 97, from 1975 to 1997, we had exceptional children's programs, but they didn't. But the parents and the kids themselves had no rights in those, in terms of being able to have any self-determination or determination for their children. The school did it and handed it to them. But now IEP meetings do not work that way. It is not a top-down, here it is kind of thing. Now it's a collaborative effort, and parents have a voice in that.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that teachers who haven't been involved, especially new teachers, they have a completely misguided notion of how an IEP team works. They still, I think a lot of them think that it's just, the school and the psychologists get together and tell the parent what's going to be. That's not the way it works. And that's why I wanted you to see that in action by visiting an actual IEP meeting. Most teachers that have been in the business for a while catch on pretty quickly because they've gone to an IEP meeting. But especially newer teachers don't get that. And that's a national thing. So this is some things to remember about exceptional children's programs. All right. I have pulled up this is from 115C, North Carolina General Statutes, all the public school laws of North Carolina. I pulled up 390 and 391 that speaks to discipline. And the reason I pulled this up, that all these disciplinary actions that you are allowed to take and are all these policies that are spelled out in state law, they also have to be consistent with IDEA. Mm-hmm. And they have to be consistent with 94-142. So there is a hierarchy. We need to understand that, and I'm glad that we're talking about this tonight in the OMA. In the OMA, one of the things that hopefully by doing the OMA, which is Evidence Artifact 4, that you understand that there's a rationale or a hierarchy in law. Federal law comes first, then state law, then local board policy, then best research practices, and then teacher input. That's the hierarchy. That's the way that it goes. So what they're saying here is we can do all these things. The state of North Carolina says you can do all these things in the discipline of a child unless it conflicts with these federal laws. Federal law comes first. So, right. For example, if you wanted to do a 10-day suspension for an exceptional child, first thing you need to understand is you can't do more than 10 days a year, a school year of suspension, either in or out of school. In-school suspension does count. You can't do more than 10 days without having to put the student through the process. And that process is manifestation determination, functional behavior assessment, a psychological, and an IEP team meeting. All those things have to occur for you to suspend a kid more than 10 days. Now, there's a catch. There is a catch. So what schools will do is that they'll have an EC kid and they'll suspend them 1 day at a time. And that way we've got 10 incidents before we have to do the manifestation determination on this kid and go through all this paperwork and process. That's a fallacy. That's not true. Let me say that again. That's not true. If a child shows a pattern on the third incident showing a pattern, you must move to a manifestation determination, regardless of the number of times, number of days that the kid's been suspended. You don't get 10 days in or out of school if the kid's doing the same thing over and over again. Let me be clear here. If an EC kid is fighting, you say, well, I'll give him 1 day. That way, we won't, we got plenty of days to work with. The third time that kid fights, even though he's only been suspended 2 days previously for the first 2 fights he's in, sorry, you got to go straight to a manifestation determination. If the kid is showing a pattern, it doesn't matter that you've only suspended him 2 days all year. On his third fight, you need to move to the manifestation determination to determine if this child can be disciplined as if this behavior is a function or a manifestation of their disability. If it is, then we need to have an IEP meeting where maybe we change the kid's IEP and put behavioral goals or behavioral support in it. If this is not a function of their disability, then we're going to be able to discipline like any other child, and certainly we've given more than 2 days for their third fight.
Right.
But for some reason, folks have this notion that we get 10 days and they're ours to play with. No, they're not. Now, if the kid has done 3 random things that aren't related, then you can give him 1 day each time. But if he's showing a pattern of the same kinds of behavior, third time's the charm, folks. Now, if you determine that a child can be disciplined the same way as any other child, they can go through a DTM, a discipline team meeting. They can go through a due process hearing. They can be put into an alternative placement. And it says so right here in the state manual. This is the North Carolina manual that speaks to EC students can be assigned to an alternative learning placement who would have been long-term suspended but were instead assigned to an alternative school. You can put them, and it tells you how to code them. They can be put into an alternative learning placement or an alternative school just like a regular ed kid, as long as they can be disciplined like any other child, but as long as what they're doing is not a manifestation of their disability. So we have some misconceptions here. School personnel and special teachers think that you can't discipline EC kids the way you can everybody else. You can if it's not a manifestation of their disability. And even if it is, you can move for a more restrictive replacement or behavioral goals. EC kids can go to alternative schools. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you can't just give kids 1 day at a time for severe infractions so that you've got plenty of days to work with over the year. You got 10 incidents to work with before you have to do the paperwork. On the third of any of the same kind of incidents, whether it's sexual or violent or whatever, the third of any kind of the same kind of incident, you better go to that manifestation determination because that kid's showing a pattern.
Sure.
So
I see a lot of people abusing that too.
Oh, yes, they do. Absolutely, they abuse that. And that's why I say it's all fun and games till somebody gets their eye put out. And then, this is one of those things that you're exactly right, Luke, that giving them 1 day deal is an abuse. That's an abuse of the system. And that's why that third time the charm rule is put in. The third time kid does the same behavior, he needs to be moved on into, instead of just giving him 1 day of suspension and never addressing his behavior, you need to move it on to the manifestation determination stages and functional behavior assessment and to find out if this is a part of his disability or not. But one way or the other, you begin to try to find some resolution for this child. But you're exactly right. That 1 day at a time is an abuse of the system, and it's abuse of that child. So that's this right. Notion that and another abuse is that in-school suspension. In-school suspension is a change in placement. That counts. That counts just like out-of-school suspension does. I've had principals try to argue that in-school suspension shouldn't count against their total. Not my decision. That's federal law. Again, that's an abuse of the system.
So in-school suspension is the same as the out-of-school?
Yes, absolutely. In-school is the same as out-of-school. Yes, sir, it is. And oh, by the way, here's another little abuse that I hear of from time to time. Therapeutic suspension is illegal also. There is no such thing as a therapeutic suspension where you call the kid's parents to come get him, and you send him home for the rest of the day, and we won't put that down as a suspension. And they call that therapeutic suspension and don't register it in higher school and don't count that as a day suspended. That's illegal also. That's that's kind of like ABC. Luke, are you old enough to remember when CMS used ABC? It was called absence before conference, when we would send a kid home and tell them that they were suspended until they brought their parents back, if they couldn't come back until they brought their parents.
Well, I remember you couldn't come back until you brought your parents, but
Right.
I wasn't sure the name of it.
Yeah, we called it ABC. That's also illegal.
That's illegal.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it violates a couple of things. First thing it violates is a suspension is supposed to be a determinate length of time based on the infraction that you did.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, a kid could be out of school for 10 days for being tardy to class if his parents were out of town or wouldn't come with him. And also, so that doesn't fit. And the second part of that is how do you put that into a state suspension? To print an official notification form requires a length of time. So, that's part and parcel of that too. Right. But also you can't punish a kid for his parents' behavior. That's the second part of it. That is being capricious. Remember those two legal standards, arbitrary and capricious? Punishing a kid for his parents' non-compliance is being capricious. You're giving him more punishment than the crime deserves. Mm-hmm. So there's two problems with that. So you can't do absence before conference. There is no such thing as a therapeutic suspension. The kid's having a bad day. You call his parents to come and get him and send him home. You don't put that down as a suspension. That is a suspension. In-school suspension counts the same as out-of-school suspension. All these are little tricks of the trade that people use to try to get over and get by. That's all well and good until you get caught.
Right.
And then when you get caught, there's tort liability. Remember, we went over that.
Right.
That means that you can be held financially liable. You can be sued and have to pay money for doing things like that. So not only does it threaten your income in terms of your job, it threatens your bank account in terms of your savings if you have any.
Just that the parents don't know about it.
Yes, and so one of the things that we're required to do, and the schools are a little lax in doing, is that, again, if you go back to Zoom session 8 and look, I've got it right here. We're required to give them these parent resources when their child is tested for EC. When they're being tested for EC, when they're in the intervention process, not the first 90 days of MTSS where we're doing interventions. That second 90 days when they're actually have been referred and we're doing the interventions prior to a testing decision. When a kid enters into the intervention that has been officially referred, his parents are supposed to be given these parent resources.
Now, the first 90 days, explain that one.
All right. I've got it's right here under this inclusion versus mainstreaming. I had a lady wrote this down for me. So this is under week 8 Zoom. So basically in North Carolina right now, we're using what's called a multi-tiered system of support. And it adds, so it's 180 days long rather than the traditional 90 days. So basically what we're doing, we're using response to intervention, RTI, to try to work with kids for 90 days who are having academic difficulty. If that does not improve their academics, we make an official referral to the school intervention team, and we start the 90-day official where we're doing interventions with them for 90 more days. And at the end of that 90 days, we make a decision whether to EC test that kid or not. So basically what we've done in North Carolina is we've doubled. The law says that every kid gets 90 days to try to, prior to he's EC tested, he gets 90 days, and the school has to put at least 2 different interventions in during that time to try to help that child. So North Carolina has added another 90 days on top of that, so that actually you're doing 90 days of RTI before you start more intensive interventions for another 90 days before a EC testing decision is made. So the kid gets 180 days. But, you know, it can't just be one of those things where he's referred one week and he's tested the next. In the summer of 2011 in CMS, 14 principals, I believe it was, were moved right before the school year. And the reason why was that kids were being referred one week and tested the next. There's no interventions were in place in their schools. Guess what the race and gender of those students was?
African American.
Males. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And so 11 or 14 principals had to find something else to do. Not a bad thing.
Wow.
The thing to remember from that is, and I've said this before, but let me say it again and let me be clear. The intervention team referral process at all public schools in North Carolina is categorized as a school-based committee by the state of North Carolina and by General Assembly, by state law, by State Department of Public Instruction, State Superintendent's Office. Everybody understands that intervention team is a school-based committee. Now, why is that important? That means principal's responsible. That means if it goes wrong, it comes right back to the principal's doorstep. For example, if you're in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, when Luke and I are referring to CMS, that's Charlotte-Mecklenburg, for those of you who maybe don't know what that is. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we have compliance technicians. So if something happens in the EC program and a kid drops off the head count, money's lost, and there's problems, it doesn't come back to the principal. It comes back to the CT, compliance technician from the EC department, and the department chair. But generally, it comes back to compliance technician. If something goes wrong with the intervention process prior to EC testing, that comes back to the principal's office. So you better make sure that your staff is doing RTI and that the kids are getting their 90 days of RTI prior to their 90 days of intervention. And remember, on that intervention team, whether you call it intervention team or school assistance team or care team, doesn't matter what you call it. The EC teacher that's a part of that team is only there as a reference person. She is not the person responsible. She's not the person liable. Let me say that again. The EC teacher or an EC teacher is on that committee, your intervention team, but they're only there as a reference person. That doesn't mean that they're in charge or that they're responsible if something goes wrong. The principal is responsible if something goes wrong. That's why when we have you assess special populations, that's one that we require you to do when you do the OMA component C, is that there are more special populations than just EC. Intervention team students are one of those, and if it goes wrong with that, you're looking for new work. Looking for something else to do. You can't make a mistake on that one. It is a school-based committee. It belongs to the principal, and for good or for bad.
Is that why it takes so long? This 90 days and 90 days?
Yes. You don't want to violate. I mean, that's what the law says, and that's the rights. Those students have that right. I mean, you got to you got to do something other than just say we're pitching and the kid's not catching, so it's his fault. You got to try something different. Our job is to teach, to find a way to work with these students. And if you do the process right, only kids that need exceptional children's services will get into the program. You won't have all these kids that just because the school wouldn't work with them, nobody would differentiate instruction. Nobody would try to remediate them. I mean, things happen in kids' lives, and sometimes kids get behind. Things happen in adults' lives, and sometimes we get behind.
Right.
But you can't put me in. You shouldn't be putting kids in EC program over that. That way you're sure when that testing decision is made, you're sure that kid needs to be tested. You've spent 180 days doing everything that you know to do to try to get that kid some help.
Mm-hmm.
It's been intensive. And that's what it should be. We should not be placing kids in the EC program lightly. That's just so. I pulled this one. This is a really good summary from Cumberland County, which is a big district. Similar. It's in Fayetteville. It's a big one. And so it works the same way as it does in Charlotte. So this is a good one here, and I've written it all down. So again, this is under Zoom session 8. All right, so we've done Gens 10. The parent resources, this is a link, and these resources come in a written form, and you're supposed to give those to parents when they come to the first meeting that you have with them once their child has been referred. You're supposed to have the second 90 days, you're supposed to meet with the parents at that time and give them make sure they understand their rights. Even though their child's not even been tested yet, they still have rights, the same rights while they're in the process. That's the second 90 days. Now, I have, again, the intervention process is spelled out in that document I just showed you. Again, it's here on this. FERPA is the federal law that covers the privacy of students. It's more than just EC, but it's mostly EC about their records and those kinds of things. You should read that. That's the link to the FERPA laws. That's federal. And then the last thing I have for us tonight, I want to look at briefly. I've got a really good PowerPoint here. Now, this PowerPoint, remember, inclusion is when the teacher comes to the room and the exceptional children are in the regular classroom. Mainstreaming, for purposes of this PowerPoint, mainstreaming is when you have separate EC classes in your school. So what we're comparing here is separate EC classes versus inclusion model, where the kids are in the regular classroom and the EC teacher comes in the regular teacher's room, rather than the EC teacher having their own room and kids being pulled out and going to them. So if we look at these, here are some of the differences.
But it's all in the same classroom, right?
Pardon?
It's all in the same classroom.
Well, inclusion is regular classroom with the EC teacher coming in. Mm-hmm. For the purposes of this PowerPoint, when they talk about mainstreaming here, it's when the EC teacher has her own classroom and the kids come to her. Okay. So that's what we're comparing and contrasting here. Separate classroom. Curriculum is academic, social, IEP, have a special ed teacher in there, versus regular classroom with learning assistants. So this kind of gives you the pros and cons. I'm not sure that we've adopted the inclusion model because we think it's better for kids. In this last round of going to inclusion, the reason why we've adopted it in this state, in North Carolina, is because it's cheaper. It requires 30% less personnel. That's why we've gone more inclusion rather than what they call mainstream, what we used to call EC classrooms, because teachers can see more kids this way, and it takes fewer teachers. I don't believe that students get the same level of services in the regular classroom as they do the EC classroom. I think the EC teacher can give them more intensive help because the class sizes are smaller. I just believe that kids probably get served better when they're pulled out, but then there's the social stigma that goes along with being pulled out. If we're just talking straight academics, I think it's much better for EC kids to be in the EC classroom. But if we're talking about total development, it's probably better for them to be in the regular classroom. I mean, it's a fine line that you're walking there. But what I do know is it costs a lot less to do inclusion rather than having EC classrooms. And so that's why we're doing it. I don't think that we have anybody who has stood up and screamed and yelled at the top of their lungs, it's better for kids to be in you know, inclusion models better for kids. I think what they've said is, it's 6 of 1, there's arguments to be made both ways, but it's just cheaper to do it with an inclusion model. And we have 30% less resources to work with now than we did before. So it's not really a debate anymore.
Right.
That's a shame, but that's the truth. That's exactly why we're doing what we're doing. So I would encourage all of you to look at this PowerPoint. It's pretty lengthy, but it's got a lot of good stuff. This is another one of those toolkit kind of things that you need to bone up on to, so that you'll know what the argument is of EC classes versus inclusion model. This one kind of covers it all. This is one of those things that you should put in your toolkit as a potential administrator, that you put this somewhere where you don't lose it. You're going to need this later on because it covers. Get on this website and copy this link and keep it in your favorites list, this parent resources. Read over the intervention process, and as one of your activities from discussion board for me this semester is to write about what the intervention process in your district. But a lot of you've already done that, but you need to understand what the intervention process is in your district, because you're responsible for it as a principal. And if it goes wrong, it's about your job. This is another one of those things that if it goes wrong, there's not just some little light punishment or a little reprimand or a stern talking to. This is about losing your job if you get this one wrong on intervention. And then here's the link to FERPA. You hear FERPA referred to all the time, and privacy and protection laws for students and families. You need to read it. There it is. I won't read it to you. So that's another one of those that you don't have to carry it around with you, but save that link somewhere so you can refer back to that. And then here's a good peer review that Robbie did for us if you want to see what the expectation for peer reviews are. As I said, try to keep up with your turn-ins. Let me go to discussion board. But if you get behind, that's it's not the end of the world, but try to keep up on your evidence artifact work. So if we go to discussion board and we look, as I said, the discussion board questions related tonight is attend an IEP meeting, who's in charge, how are decisions made, what role does the parent play. That all speaks to IDEA when the law changed in 1997. All of a sudden, when you go now, the teacher's not just in charge anymore. It's a group collective. The decisions are made as a group. Parent has an active voice in that decision. All that changed with IDEA in 97. That was not originally part of the special ed law from 1975. Parents did not have those rights. Now they have a set of rights. Again, there's a link to those rights on our Zoom session 8 tonight. You need to understand that. Parents aren't second-class citizens in those meetings anymore. And then the next one is on 7A, again, that's why it's 7 and 7A, interview the chair of your intervention team. This is the school-based committee that receives referrals. Outline the 90-day process prior to EC and then the 90-day after that, because everybody does MTSS. That's why I had those two questions in there tonight. So those are, if you didn't understand them, hopefully if you view the video tonight and see the materials under Zoom session, you'll understand that that these are the two major issues here. That parents can be involved in their child's education. You can discipline them if you put them through the manifestation termination process and determine that their behavior is not a function of their disability. That you cannot, that in-school suspension counts the same as out in terms of you only get 10 days, but you can't just continue to give 1 day suspension for the same behavior. On the third time a kid exhibits the same behavior, you got to put him through the manifestation termination process. Yeah. Just some of those kinds of things that are practical every day. Yes, a kid can be sent to an alternative school if it's determined that his behavior is not a function of his disability. He can be AC kids can be sent to alternative schools. Absolutely, they can. They can be sent home for 10 days. They can have a due process hearing. All those things can happen, but you better be clean and you better be following the process all the way through.
So they could be sent home for 10 days each time, each incident?
Absolutely, as long as it's not related to your disability, as long as the school does the manifestation determination, functional behavior assessment, psychological, as long as they do that paperwork packet each time, yes. I've seen kids, um, the number 45 strikes me. I've seen kids suspended, EC kids suspended as many 45 days in the same year, but they were, widely disparate incidents. I think one was drugs, one was fighting, one was some kind of a sexual misbehavior. They weren't related kind of things. And when we did functional behaviors, when we did manifestation determination, we determined this has nothing to do with their disability. He has a reading disability. That had nothing to do with him fighting, selling drugs, or bringing a weapon.
Mm.
So there's some common misconceptions that go both ways. Again, read, 115C 391, and then there's also a document in your district that speaks to discipline of exceptional children. You need to run that down and find it. But you need to bone up on these things. And that was the idea of the number one. There's 12 million of those kids out there. You're not going to be in a situation where you don't have to know this. You need to know these things. So that's why I have these things tonight. So again, go back to 115C 391. Right here it is, 390.1. And it speaks to those things. Go back to the disciplinary data reporting, and it speaks to a couple of places in here, speaks to disciplining exceptional children, that they can go to alternative programs. For some reason, there's a common misconception out there that you can't send DC kids to an alternative program. Yes, you can. And there's even a code in Power School to code that kid.
They do it all the time.
Yeah.
But there seems to be some difficulty sending them back, though.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because they've not been academically successful. That's the problem. Generally, for a child that gets sent to an alternative learning placement, an ALP, which there's more than just a discipline school, an alternative school. For a child that gets sent there, how do they're supposed to be sent for a certain length of time, but also they have to show that they're being successful, that they're ready to go back, that they've acclimated behavior-wise, or they're doing better academically, or both, for them to go back. And yes, it seems very difficult sometimes to get those EC kids back to the regular school, because generally they haven't been successful there. But see, that's kind of counterintuitive too, is you sent me to a place for 6 weeks, I'm not successful, and so you're going to keep me there because I'm not successful, when really we ought to be moving those kids back.
Right.
But then there are folks who will argue behind closed doors, if we send them back after 6 weeks of being unsuccessful, then basically what we're saying is we weren't trying to rehabilitate those kids, we were just punishing them for 6 weeks. The whole idea of an alternative learning placement, ALP, is that you're trying to work with those kids. It's not supposed to just be a punishment. And if we send you over there and you're not being successful, then pretty much it was just a punishment. And folks don't want to admit that. But I've had parents say to me as a principal when I would suspend their child, suspension is bad for my child. And I would have to acknowledge to them, I realize that, but um, I'm not suspending your child, to I'm not telling you that suspension is a good thing for your child. I'm not suspending your child as a good thing for them. I'm taking the other children in the room into consideration and doing the right thing for them. It may be the wrong thing for your child, but it's the right thing for the other 30 kids in that room to give them an opportunity to learn. Now, sometimes you just have to be honest. And so I never claimed that suspension was good for the child being suspended. I will not, I think there are some good alternative learning programs out there, and I think some of them are good for kids. But basically what you're trying to do for that 6 weeks is remove that kid and let things cool down and maybe get that kid's head right. But it doesn't, but but it doesn't work for every kid. For some kids, it is just a punishment. But we've got to be big enough to admit that and just go on and let those kids come back after 6 weeks. But if we hold them to some artificial standard of success at that alternative learning placement, some of them are never going to get out. And you know that as well as I do.
That's right.
They're never going to get out if the standard for letting them out is not time. If it's performance, they're never getting out. And so what I would say is if we're sending the kid over for 6 weeks and he's an EC kid, at the end of 6 weeks, he's got to go back, period. The likelihood of him being successful in a new placement during that 6 weeks is slim, very slim. And you've got to acknowledge that. Now, that doesn't mean that the place shouldn't exist and that the place isn't successful. It's just not right. Every kid's not going to thrive in that environment.
Right.
And we can't make returning back to the homeschool, we can't make a condition of that the kid be successful at the alternative learning placement. That's unrealistic. I also think that that's probably capricious. That's probably additional punishment, in my opinion.
Yeah, because they're sending back right away, too.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I think it's incumbent upon all potential administrators to delve into the exceptional children intervention, 504 LEP, Title I, and be prepared, number one, to be able to do your job effectively, but number two, to do the right thing for kids. Mm-hmm. The more you learn about this stuff, the more that I believe you will become an advocate for children and try to do the right thing for them.
Right.
So remember, I've got some resources there, and you can always go to your disciplinary data manual that I had under other weeks. You can always go to public school laws that I had under the other weeks. But, always your big reference, for law is the general statute, starting with, 115C. And the discipline statutes start at 390. And so you should read those. Now, in your code of conduct that I have given you previously, that's what I was referring to. Every district has a section on disciplining exceptional children. CMS is no different. In your code of conduct, or along in your students' rights and responsibilities handbook, along with your code of conduct, it outlines how you can discipline exceptional children. Every district has some little differences and similarities, but you need to read that too. So you need to read the general statutes, you need to read the alternative and disciplinary data reporting manual from DPI, and you need to read your local school student handbook, student parent rights and responsibilities handbook that speaks to disciplining those children, because it will outline things like the manifestation and termination process. That's all local, but that's going to be pretty similar no matter what district you're in. You're going to manifestation and termination always is about determining if the behavior the kid is exhibiting is a function of his disability. And you'll always have to do a functional behavior assessment. You'll always have to do a psychological. And you'll have to do that manifestation, the Deck 5 paperwork is what we call it. You know what that is, Lou. Deck 5, the EC5. You'll have to do that stuff. So those are some thoughts that I have on exceptional children. There's some good stuff to read. There's a good PowerPoint that speaks to inclusion and again, mainstreaming in that context of that PowerPoint is having a EC teacher in an EC classroom that EC kids go to during the day. Pull out. Inclusion is when EC kids go to regular or scheduled into regular classes, and the teacher comes and works with them in that class. So that is the argument. That PowerPoint is an excellent summation of that entire argument, and it speaks to the law and policies. So that's a good one for you too. You need to bone up on EC law and policy and practice. Title I, LEP, ESL, you need to make sure that when you do OMAC this semester that you really dig in there and find out all there is to know about that stuff at your school. I think that's very important. I see my time is up. Luke, questions?
As far as the peer reviews, are we supposed to pick new people all the time?
Let's see, for y'all, let me go back here.
I know we had certain people, but I see people just jumping all over the place.
Yeah. So what happened was, for your first peer review, here was your group here, and then here, this is under course. So these are you only had to do two group reviews, and so I've got them here. So I've got, your first group, it was you, Blackwell and Barnwell, and then the second group, it was Farish and Green for you. Okay. And so yes, I did switch them. That way you get to work with some different people, as many as possible during this. But yes, if you don't know who your Zoom peer review group is, that's under course overview, I have the groups made up for you. And if y'all want to make up your own groups and do something different, that doesn't make me mad either. As long as 2 or 3 of you get together and view one another's work, that just makes me happy. I just suggested these groups. Main thing is don't use the same group on both of them. Make a different group. Try to get to know as many people as you can, because these are going to be your colleagues, and hopefully you'll form some kind of a support system or support group, or at least you'll know people when you get a job this way. All right. Luke, I appreciate you being with me tonight. It's always good to talk with you.
Yes, same here.
All right. I'll see everybody next week. Everybody have a good week. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.